After 5 years, the Russian collusion narrative continues to collapse in on itself in spectacular fashion. Now remember, this was all the media could talk about for 4 years during the Trump presidency. So let's revisit the insanity. Watch.
And so far, it is us as American citizens, it is us in the press who are connecting the dots on this story, who are figuring this out.
Did the Trump campaign, did the candidate at the heart of it conspire with Russia to subvert American democracy? And does Russia have some kind of leverage over Donald Trump?
If this BuzzFeed News report is true, then we are likely on our way to possible impeachment proceedings.
If this story is true, we must begin impeachment proceedings.
This is suborning perjury. I think there's no question it's an impeachable offense.
And at that point, we are in high crimes and misdemeanor, and we are in impeachment territory.
Right. This president needs to be impeached.
Impeachment is the remedy. I mean, the president can't...
It's the only remedy.
The spirit of what Trump did is clearly treasonous.
This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
There's outright treason. I mean, there is no question.
I think he's feeling the noose around his neck.
The noose is tightening, and I think they're shocked that the noose is tightening.
He feels the noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
The sound of hoofbeats of all those investigations catching up with Donald Trump must be loud in his ears.
He may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
People might go to jail.
You're exactly right.
For the rest of their lives.
I think they're all going to jail.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing.
Oh, except it wasn't who you thought it would be. Oh, they were all beside themselves. Trump colluded with the Russians. They were positive. It was a fact. And to say otherwise was to deny them. It was to be a traitor to your country. I was accused of treason. I was told by these trolls that Mueller was coming. Mueller doesn't even know where the hell he is. How could he be going anywhere? Remember, we were all told this stuff. It was such a threat to the survival of our republic. We had an independent counsel led by Robert Mueller, and then another special counsel appointed by then AG Bill Barr, led by John Durham, which is ongoing. And after all of this, after all of the breathless screaming by legacy media, the nearly $40 million spent by the independent counsel, literally the only people who have been arrested are Democrat surrogates with absolute ties to the DNC and the Clinton campaign. There's a paper trail. Are we surprised? Because the whole thing was a sham. We all knew this from the very beginning. It was entirely created by the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, this whole Russian hoax thing, it was a plan B in case the unthinkable happened, and Trump actually beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. Well, guess what? The unthinkable did happen. And so all of the surrogates with the DNC and the Clinton campaign and Perkins Coie, they all concocted this very elaborate hoax. So let's pull apart this latest revelation and simplify this whole convoluted ruse. The Russian hoax can feel sometimes like it gets in the weeds and it's complicated and confusing to follow all of these different talking points, but that's exactly how it was designed by Democrats and the media. They don't want you to understand that this is actually a scandal, what they did, that makes Watergate look like just a back page story in a small town newspaper. See, there was absolutely collusion, but it wasn't between Donald Trump and Russia. In fact, it was arguably much worse than that, because this collusion to destroy a sitting president and deny voters their agency was perpetrated by the Clinton campaign, the DNC, our weaponized intelligence agencies, and the legacy press, who not only reported with the leaks used, but they legitimized all of this. So now we're getting many more details, all affirmed by the arrest of a man named Igor Danchenko, a Russian official, about how he, a longtime Clinton operative, he was used by the Clinton campaign and Fusion GPS and everyone else. They all used these proxies to pull off this hoax so that they could have some space between themselves and these actions. So Danchenko, he's the guy that John Durham just indicted on 5 counts of lying to the FBI. So it turns out Danchenko, he is the Russian source. I mean, the actual sole source used by Christopher Steele, the former disgraced British spy who created the STEELE, actually the Clinton dossier. He got all of his information from this Igor Danchenko guy. And remember, this was information that supposedly linked Trump to Russia and had all of this bad information about him. So again, Danchenko is the source, the Russian source, Kremlin operative, who just made up a bunch of stuff and sold it to the DNC and the Clinton campaign through Fusion GPS and Chris Steele. Allegations like how Trump peed on hookers in some Russian hotel, right? in a bed that was once slept in by the Obamas. All of it was lies. In fact, the FBI refused to stand by it from the beginning. They said they couldn't verify any of the information from the get-go. And Danchenko gave this and other false information all to Christopher Steele. And he put it into that now discredited Clinton dossier. Now, you remember Christopher Steele was considered to be a credible source with a proven record of providing reliable and sensitive and important information to the U.S. government. That's what we were told. And he had come across some just troubling evidence of Trump's collusion, and he brought it to U.S. law enforcement. So let's just run it all down again real fast because it can get confusing, and it's meant to be so it couldn't go back to the Clinton campaign. So the Clinton campaign, they hired a proxy, Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is a law firm that has long worked with Hillary Clinton, and Perkins Coie then engaged Fusion GPS. It's not so much an intel firm. They do lobbying as well. In fact, it was Fusion GPS that was working to lobby Congress to get the Magnitsky Act repealed. Now, you remember the Magnitsky Act was named after an individual who blew the whistle on some bad Russian embezzlement, and they killed this guy. And so there were sanctions that were put on a lot of these Russian oligarchs, and Fusion GPS was operating, somehow not even registering as a foreign agent. I had talked to Andy McCarthy about this on my radio program as to why Fusion GPS wasn't operating and why they weren't operating under FARA, because clearly they needed to be. And there were process charges brought on that against other individuals for less. So anyway, they were the firm that they were hired to basically dig up this dirt and carry out this for the Clinton campaign. So Fusion GPS then contracted Christopher Steele. He's a former British spy. He was going to give this whole dossier, he was going to legitimize it because they were going to run off his legacy, except he's kind of disgraced. So Christopher Steele then, he worked with Igor Danchenko. And Danchenko is the source for all the made-up garbage in this now infamous Steele/Clinton dossier. Now, here's the other thing to note about this. The information that was provided in the dossier is the same information that was surreptitiously leaked to members of the press. And members of the press wrote stories about the things that were leaked to them that Danchenko and Steele were colluding on. And then you had Fusion GPS that took that information before a FISA court. In fact, they did this through Nellie Orr, one of their staff members whose husband Bruce Orr works at the Department of Justice, and it was through that conduit that they went to the FISA court and said, look at all this information, we got to start surveilling people. Now, Durham's indictment of Igor Danchenko alleges that he lied about two key things. First and foremost, Danchenko fabricated the claim that the president of the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce informed him during the 2016 presidential campaign that Trump was involved in some sort of well-developed conspiracy of cooperation with the regime of Vladimir Putin. Now, in truth, the indictment says that this conversation literally never happened. Secondly, Danchenko is alleged to have concealed that one of his sources for the information he provided to Steele was another longtime Democrat operative who had worked with the Clintons before, Chuck Dolan. That's Danchenko's other source. He worked on both of Bill Clinton's successful presidential campaigns, and he worked on Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign, also her Senate stuff too. Chuck Dolan's a longtime Clintonite, and he's probably feeling a little bit nervous this morning. So in other words, Danchenko knew that he was working with Democrats and Clintons. He's known the Clintons too. Failed to disclose any of that to the FBI and lied about it when questioned. So that's one of the reasons he's being indicted. But there are even bigger bombshells wrapped up in this indictment of Danchenko. So now it seems clear that the FBI, they were well aware that Danchenko lied to them, but that didn't stop them from taking the Steele/Clinton dossier and using it to gain those warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. But it wasn't until John Durham got involved that Danchenko was actually finally charged. So this means that there was an intentional effort within James Comey's FBI to cover up the fact that, one, the Steele dossier was Russian-peddled disinformation, and that, two, a crime was being committed by creating it. Instead, the FBI pretended that they didn't know. They let the Trump-Russia collusion specter grow, swaying the 2018 midterms. And by the way, remember, it was an FBI official that was charged and actually lost his badge. He was charged, and he was this is by the DOJ after the fact, because it was discovered that he had altered a CIA email. All of this led up to them going after Carter Page, And it was the FBI during this entire time, based on all of this garbage. They were going after Carter Page as a Russian asset. And then when this FBI agent and all of these people involved in this found out that Carter Page was actually a CIA asset against the Russians, they omitted that. They literally deleted it from the email and then included that email with that deleted into their treasure trove of stuff to necessitate either further surveillance or the beginning of surveillance on all these people associated with the Trump campaign. And people wonder why Americans don't trust our institutions. Further, the media, including the Washington Post and Yahoo News, and everybody's name sadly was redacted from, well, most people. You knew that they were media outlets. They knew that Danchenko was the source for STEELE going all the way back to January of 2017, some even longer than that. What that means is that while the news media were pushing and peddling these Russian collusion conspiracies, they were actually aware that they were part of the real collusion happening on the side, the Democrat side of this whole thing, with STEELE and the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Do you think that the legacy media is talking about any of these bombshells this morning? Of course not. Here's a tweet from Chuck Ross showing that BuzzFeed, who initially broke the STEELE dossier story, or Clinton dossier story, they didn't have anything to say about the new revelations that totally discredit it. In fact, BuzzFeed still, I mean, you look at there was absolutely nothing from BuzzFeed's website on any of this. The tweet shows an empty search bar after an attempted search of BuzzFeed. Anybody can go to BuzzFeed's website and look at this about the Danchenko arrest and the lies, which are the basis for the STEELE dossier. So if your brain hasn't exploded yet, it gets worse. So do you remember Chuck Dolan, right? We just talked about him a moment ago. So he turns out to be the source for Danchenko's made-up garbage about Trump and his ties, so-called ties to Russia. And Chuck Dolan, as I told you, he's a longtime operative with Hillary Clinton. See, Charles Dolan, he was always Hillary Clinton's clandestine PR guy. He's worked with her for ages. So Danchenko and Dolan all conspired. You had Hillary's PR buddy, one of her right-hand people, working with a Kremlin source. The only reason Danchenko was needed was so that they could say that the source of the Russian collusion accusations came from a well-placed Russian source. But these falsehoods were coming from the PR man and Hillary surrogate Dolan. So Danchenko was he was kind of a pass-through there to give the Russian cover, relaying falsehoods from Dolan to be used by STEELE, making it look like everything was, this was tightly held information coming from the Kremlin. Now, from there, STEELE was going to launder the lies to the media. Now, as we said this is all an absolute scam. So the indictments keep piling up. And the other recent Durham indictment is Michael Sussman. Guess where he's a partner at? Perkins Coie, the law firm that hired Fusion GPS, the law firm that hired Christopher Steele with Fusion GPS and worked with Igor Danchenko to launder lies from Chuck Dolan, PR man for Hillary Clinton. So why was Michael Sussman indicted? Because he gave the FBI server information that he says tied the Trump organization to Russian banks. Of course, he failed to mention to the FBI that he was working for the Clinton campaign when he did this. Slight conflict of interest in addition to it just being a crime. Sussman was promised the top government job if Hillary was elected. Now, all of this means that the con job by the Democrat Party and the Clinton campaign should go down as one of the most scandalous political hoaxes and crimes in American history. This was an attempted takedown of a legitimately and lawfully elected president. It was an attempt to rob voters of their agency and disenfranchise everyone who voted. And it was not done by a foreign enemy. It was created and it was perpetrated by members of the Democrat Party, the Hillary Clinton campaign, our own FBI, aided and abetted at every single turn this criminality. And it was covered up by the legacy press.